My name is Don Balcom, and I'm professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina, which is in the United States. And my area of research, which also overlaps with my clinical interest, is working with couples in a variety of contexts. Originally working with couples where they were having relationship difficulties, and then I became very interested in how individual functioning and relationship functioning interact with each other. I think in our field, traditionally, the treatment for adult individual problems has been individual therapy, and for relationship problems has been couple therapy. And that makes a great deal of sense. But over time, I came to recognize that these two perhaps were not so independent of each other. And that's based not just on my own thinking and clinical experience, but if you actually look at the research literature, one of the things that you find, at least in the United States, is the most common reason that people seek outpatient individual therapy is for relationship difficulties. And if couples come in with relationship difficulties, what you find is that more than half of them include at least one partner who's experiencing significant psychological difficulties. So what it really looks like is that individual psychological difficulties affect relationships, and relationships affect individual psychological difficulties. And there's a large body of literature that indicates that if couples don't know how to deal with the psychological difficulties, even if they don't intend to, they can inadvertently make the psychological difficulty actually even worse, not help the person get over it, but actually exacerbate or slow down the recovery process. So in the last couple of decades, I've really been focusing my research on treatment development where one member of a couple has either psychological difficulties or medical difficulties, and how you might use a couple to really intervene where the focus is to try to help the individual who's having psychological difficulties, for example. To very briefly summarize what we're finding with regard to couples where one person has some form of psychopathology, and there are common elements that we include in those interventions, and at the same time, according to the specific disorder, there are parts that are unique to that disorder. So for people with obsessive compulsive disorder, you have to help them stop the rituals, and we teach the partner how to do that to where they don't engage in the compulsions. For people with anorexia, it differs because you have to help them eat, and we teach the couple together how to establish healthy eating patterns as a couple and as a family. People who are depressed are withdrawn, and consistent with our behavioral principles, behavioral activation is really crucial. So one of the most important things in all of these interventions where we're working with couples is we stay very true to our cognitive behavioral principles that we know are efficacious, and we simply bring those into an interpersonal relational lens where we bring the partner into the process but still focus on those major intervention strategies. And again, those will differ by disorder, so we maintain that primary emphasis on empirically supported interventions, but how we get a partner to assist in that process. So I think that what we're seeing, at least our initial data, and I would not want to overstate it, but what our initial results show is that we're getting pretty strong effects just in terms of symptom relief. We're getting good maintenance long term because we're changing the environment. And it looks like we might be able to lower the dropout rate that we see at least in some disorders because the partner is there and encouraging the person to stay in treatment even when the patient's own motivation might be lagging. I don't think that that's magical. I think it's because we maintain the focus on the treatment principles that have good empirical support. But what we in essence are doing is we're bringing the person's immediate social environment, the environment they live in on a day-to-day basis, we're bringing that environment, that social environment, the partner, into the session so that their environment is behaving in a way that's totally consistent with our treatment goals. So if the data are looking good, why is it that we predominantly do individual therapy? I think what you find in our discipline of psychotherapy, and it's not surprising, is that people continue to do what they learned. And so we have a major paradigm in the mental health field that for adults, if they have an individual psychological problem, you treat them individually. That sounds reasonable. What's interesting is if you think about children, from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, it would be extremely rare that you would bring a child in and not bring their parents or caregivers in, because you know that those parents and caregivers have a major influence on how that child functions. So it's a given, that's a paradigm when we're working with children, but somehow we say, oh, you're a mature, autonomous adult, so we should just work with you individually. And whereas I do think that individual psychological difficulties exist, I think perhaps where we've been too narrow is that what we have to realize is that people do have individual problems, but they don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in isolation. They exist in a social context. And that social context has a significant impact on the course of therapy. I don't think we should stop doing individual therapy. We have helped tremendous proportion of people with psychological difficulties with our individual work. What I would hope is that we can simply broaden and be more flexible in our paradigm to consider the possibility of including a partner when appropriate.